ISNA, and IRFAN have long histories. Many people have served on the boards. Many people have served on the executive committees. And if you go through, for instance, the letter from CRA to the charity saying, you guys are busted, there's 27 pages of material describing who ran it, where the money went, etc. If you look on the last page, there's annexes A to I and another 27 sections of material. The joy of this is that a number of these organizations, whether it's the Brothers, the Homanists, or whatever, if you look at a number of their organizations over a period of time, you start to see the same people over and over and over again. So as you pull on the thread of one, you start to get the fabric of all of them, which is kind of a good thing, I think. So between the busted charities, between the fact that the Brothers were elected in Egypt in 212 and then got busted in 213, while they were in power, a whole bunch of Muslim brothers got a little bit dumb and sort of came up out of the woodwork and kind of went, yay team, go guys, you know, this is good, we're in power now. And they sort of self-identified. There's all kinds of pictures of them, you know, standing out in front of number 10 Downing Street, all proud of themselves. And now, of course, this is coming back to haunt them. The other thing that's been quite good is the Americans have finished the Holy Land Relief Foundation criminal trials for funding Hamas, as well as Benevolence International and a bunch of others. And for some reason or other, they took all the documents from the searches and everything else and stuck them on the internet. And large numbers of Canadians are listed in there as unindicted co-conspirators, Masuls in the Brotherhood, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a whole rich body of information that wasn't there 2 or 3 years ago, and now it is. So there's grounds to be optimistic. Apparently we hear there's a federal election coming in the spring, in the fall, no one's quite sure, depends what Mr. Harper finally does. But I think based on what we've seen so far and based on the events of last week, I think we're going to see these kinds of issues become election issues. And Canada needs a discussion on extremism in Canada. It's a good thing. We should.
The next question. What's radicalizing in the Canadian education system? So on our university campuses, in Quran schools, in private religious mosque schools, and in public schools. How far along is this radicalism or extremism in Canada's education system?
Let me, just by example, a number of folks here may be familiar with 9,000 Bathurst, the Jafari Mosque. Yes. There was a East End Madrasa. The mosque runs 3 schools, East, Center, and West. Someone launched a complaint against the East End Madrasa, and the York Regional Police did something they called a hate propaganda investigation. That's what they actually called it in their report. And they came out and said, look, the school is using Iranian textbooks, and they're coming from Iran, they're coming from an Iranian-based organization in New York, and what they're teaching lands into the territory that we might call hate propaganda. I would also argue it's contrary to the Constitution and it's contrary to the Charter of Rights. So some of the stuff that was being taught to, and this is like a K-8 school, some of the stuff that's being taught is sports. So they talk about sports and they say, little boys should do sports, okay? And they say because Allah issues you the body, He grants you the body, He grants you life, it is your responsibility to keep the body healthy and in good shape. And you look at that and you go, yeah, okay, nothing wrong with that. That's kind of good. And then they say the reason you want to stay in good shape is because you have to go off and do jihad. And it's like, oh, okay, now we're kind of in a bit of a rough territory here. And then it says in the next line down, girls do not do sports. Girls should do hobbies because girls will become wives and mothers. And you kind of go, yeah, okay, Province of Ontario, 2012, I'm not really sure that's consistent with our values. There's all the rest of the stuff in there. The Jews are Nazis, the Jews are shifty, and all that kind of stuff. All the usual Iranian hate is in there. And this is what's being taught in the school system. The good news was that the York Regional Police did the investigation, said they couldn't lay charges because it doesn't rise to the level of criminality, but the Toronto District School Board, or whatever it's called, sort of invited the mosque to remove the school from the premises, and I think the mosque got smart and decided to shut the thing down rather than get into the battle. I would argue that that's one example of a much larger problem right across Canada. If you would like to see insights into what's being done, go on to Google, look at Google News, and look at Ofsted, O-F-S-T-E-D. It's the British system. The Brits are having an investigation into a bunch of their schools right now, and what they're turning up is not very happy. So there's a problem. One other quick note is just to say, yeah, the universities and campuses, when the brothers came to North America in the 1950s and eventually started to agree to set up above the ground organizations, the first thing they created was the Muslim Student Association, because they recognized that the future lies in youth, you need to do recruiting and training. So a lot of kids in the Muslim Student Association, their first and second year at U of T or ULO or whatever, will not see anything going on. And if you ask them about the Muslim Brotherhood, they look at you like, what? What are you talking about? But they use that as a recruiting area. When you see kids in their third and fourth year who have the right attitude, the right direction, whatever, those are the ones who'll start saying, oh, you should come with us to a summer training camp. You should join this organization. So yeah, anyway.
Just a question, did you see I mentioned it from the pulpit on this past Shabbat, this video from the Jafari Center of the beheading reenactment at their school play, and their reaction was that they were not, yes, it's true that they reenacted a beheading on the stage, but that this was just a historical reenactment. They weren't encouraging kids to go and do this themselves.
Yeah, I've seen the video. What is disturbing to me about the video is less the beheading ceremony, because okay, you know, the argument is it's a piece of nasty history in Shia history. When Islam was first formed and it bifurcates into Shia and Sunni, it's a really messy affair. People get killed, heads got cut off. Ali or Hussein, I think, was physically lost his head, and then they actually lost the head for 400 years and found it again. It's like, oh, what a piece of history. But hey, I mean, that's what happened. It's history. So, okay, so they reenact this thing as part of the Passion Play, as part of the Christmas play. You know, you can like, okay. What bothered me about the video is that the little kids are all marched in, and these kids are 3, 4, and 5 years old as they march in to start with, and they've got t-shirts on that say, live like Ali, die like Hussein. They're wearing the Green Martyrs headband, and then they're carrying the Martyrs banners, and they're doing, you know, the whole Hezbollah thing by heart and all this kind of stuff. And you kind of look at it and go, wow, the beheading thing is kind of out there. Okay. The dressing little kids up who are 3 and 4 and 5 years old and advocating that they should emulate the life of a martyr, and martyrs get their heads cut off and blown up, is not kind of a good thing. Then you put that in the context of the weekend schools that the Iranians are running here in Canada, where they advocate that little Ahmed is a hero, and it's in one of their textbooks. There's little Ahmed the hero, and he's a hero because he strapped a landmine to his chest and ran out and blew up a tank. So then you put that in context, and then you put it in the context of their expansion project, which the president of the mosque actually up there says it's Muslims only, and by Muslims he meant Shia, by Shia he meant Khomeinists. And then you put it in the context of the funding that's going on up there, which is highly questionable. We're going to hear more about later. And as a package, it's very worrying. So the beheading video by itself is a little unnerving, but when you put it in the context, and all knowledge is contextual, when you put it in the context, it's very worrying that this is a group of people who advocate isolation from the rest of Canada. They advocate that Quranic law rises above the Constitution, above criminal law. And here they are bringing in 3, 4, and 5-year-old kids going, martyrdom is like normal and it's to be emulated. I'm not sure that's a Canadian value, and I'm not sure what the social services people think about 3-year-olds doing it, but anyway.
The next question. What's happening in Canada with jihadi recruitment? So specifically beheadings, attacks on soldiers to provoke martyrdom, and the public kidnapping of the 3-year-old grandchild in Montreal of a very prominent Jewish financial executive.
Okay, a whole bunch of questions there. First one, what's going on with recruiting? In Canada, for a period of years, and by years I mean in excess of 25 or 30, there has been a sort of conveyor belt system developed where young people are brought in, their heads are filled full of silly thoughts, and they're put on this sort of conveyor belt to radicalization and eventually to extremism. Most of the folks doing this in Canada are not stupid enough to put a gun in their hand and tell them to go. But what they do is they create this political space, they create this idea where you should be a martyr, you should go sacrifice your life for whatever cause. So that's like the push part of the system. And then when the pull part of the system starts, like an ISIS video that says, hey, if you're in Canada, if you don't have a gun, you might have a car. If you don't have a car, you should have poison. If you can't poison someone, spit in their face. This is the young man in Saint-Jean-sur-Richelieu last week, that he was put on this conveyor belt. He's radicalized within a certain community. And then when he starts hearing the videos and watching this, he chooses to act out on those. Unlike the old days where he would have gone over there to do it. Commissioner of the RCMP has come out and said the second guy that did the shooting at the War Memorial in the Parliament, in fact, did a video before his death outlining what he was going to do, how he was going to do it, the causes, everything else. Again, we see that same process of a young man who is converted, brought along a certain path, and then sort of pushed along, and then chooses to act out in a certain manner. This has been going on for a while. I mentioned earlier about London and Calgary. Like, why do cities like Calgary or London or whatever produce these young men who go off and help organize the attack on the gas plant in Algeria? Why does a guy from Calgary go be a suicide bomber in Iraq? I mean, like, really? You know, like, how does that happen? And the answer is, there's a bunch of organizations been working at this for years to create that aura of extremism, and they're getting it. Young Muslims in Canada have a website operated here in Ontario that says you should become a lover of death. It's that clear. It's posted on the internet. It's not like they're hiding it. It's quite clear. With reference to the thing in Montreal, for those of you who read French, go into the Journal de Montréal, look up for a thing called an article by Andrew McIntosh. That's the long article. It's about 5 pages long. For those of you who read English only, look in the Calgary Sun, Ottawa Sun chain, and look again for an article on Chiheb Batik. If you read that article, you will see the journalist, Andrew McIntosh, says Chiheb Batik goes out and attempts to kidnap a 3-year-old child. He tasers the father, punches him, kicks him, runs off with the 3-year-old, but then a kid going by on a bicycle sort of intercepts him, another citizen comes along, the father recovers, gets over, they all jump on the guy, the police come along, Chiheb Batik gets arrested, thrown in jail, now he's serving 6 years for an attempted kidnapping. Partway through that legal process, just before he was being sentenced, a number of folks, me and a couple of others, started looking at Chiheb Batik and said, hang on just a second, this guy is Muslim Association of Canada, he is their director of education, they have 23 schools or 22 schools or something like that, and he's a high-profile guy within that community, but yet he's involved in something as stupid as attempting to kidnap the 3-year-old grandson of a super-rich Montreal area Jewish businessman. It's like, something's going on here. This is not some idiot trying to kidnap a guy to line his pockets to make some money. If you go in and read what Andrew McIntosh has written, he outlines the fact that there has to be at least 2 accomplices who were never caught. He outlines the fact that the guy ran away from his car once he grabbed the child, indicating there's another car involved. And Andrew McIntosh in the Journal de Montréal makes it very clear that he thinks that this kidnapping was carried out to finance the new cultural center that the Muslim Brotherhood was building, or was buying, correctly, in Montreal, 615 Rue Belmont, the old SNC building. He makes that argument, and I think it's valid, because Chiheb Batik was not only the education director, he was the guy responsible for buying this new building. $6 million or some odd dollars they were going to pay for this vacant building. And Chiheb Batik and the whole project wound up in court because they promised the money, it was in escrow, and then it wasn't there, and then the seller wouldn't sell it, and then the whole thing wound up in court, and lawyers are yelling at lawyers, and the judges are yelling at everybody, and whatever. So the financing fell apart. When you go back and look, according to Andrew McIntosh, and according to what the police did in the investigation, as that project was collapsing and the financing was disappearing, that's when he starts doing Google searches for buy taser in America, buy tear gas in America, etc., etc. So the Journal de Montréal, after having considered this article for a period of time, published it and said, it is a reasonable question to ask, was that kidnapping personal profit for Chiheb Batik, or was that fundraising for the Brotherhood? So yeah, have a look at the newspaper article. That's something that should be discussed more in circles.
Second last question. What is the Canadian public security / institutional / intelligence response in Canada to this threat? So whether it's monitoring, whether it's internet monitoring, whether it's border crossings from hotspots, what do we see happening from the Canadian security institutional establishment to monitor and to proactively interdict?
Having been a part of that community and having testified in trials, I was going to divide the answer into 2 parts. First part is the extremist threat, the guy with the bomb or the gun kind of thing. I think there's room for improvement. I think other things could be done. But by and large, there's been a number of plots disrupted. People have been intercepted. Weapons have been seized. People have gone to jail. Explosives have been taken away. Toronto 18 via plot, Moment Collage, or whatever. Basically a good thing. A number of other people have been disrupted through the National Security Certificate Program. So their positions have been badly disrupted, so they can't carry on their work. That's the good news kind of the article. The bad news side of things, I would argue, that the non-violent extremism, which is creating the conveyor belts, which is creating the atmosphere, which is doing the funding, etc., is not being looked at as hard as it should be, which is why my comment at the start is we need a national level inquiry to develop an inventory, if you will, of the flow coming into Canada of the ideology, the individuals, the money.
My last question then, and you should all be aware of the fact that Tom is not treating this as a one-on, one-off visit. He is coming back to work with lawyers, accountants, legal researchers, and others to be able to develop case material and the logic that's required, the level of standard of evidence, so that we can begin to act. The Jewish community has a very long, multi-generational tradition of being powerless. And according to McGill-trained academic Ruth Bliss, in her book Judaism and Power, or Jews and Power, she makes the point that Jews really have never effectively exercised power, and that may be to our detriment and may even include currently, even with the state of Israel. So my last question is, what's promising and what's to be learned from actions in other countries?
One quick example, I think, of something that's going right would be the United Kingdom at the moment. Lord knows lots of things have gone wrong there, but there's a few things going right. The first thing is the British government, Prime Minister Cameron, has put forth an investigation into the Muslim Brotherhood. And a lot of people are saying, oh, are they going to be called a terrorist group or not? And the answer is no, they won't be called a terrorist group, because that wasn't what the investigation was designed to do. The investigation was designed to identify the Brotherhood in the United Kingdom. Apparently they'll be identified as having about 60 or so front groups, including a TV channel. And then the recommendations from the investigation probably will refer to stuff like the charities, the funding, the individuals, the groups, and the bringing in of foreign clerics and foreign radicals to build the strength of these organizations. And it will probably also look at the education system. So if you look at it, countries as diverse as the United Kingdom, Russia, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, and Egypt have all looked at the Brotherhood and said, we need to find a new way of dealing with these guys. Banning them as a terrorist group may be an approach, probably not really workable at the end of the day, but maybe dealing with something, looking at their funding, etc., probably a good way to go about doing it. That thing in the United Kingdom is occurring because of a lesson they learned from, say, 2001, maybe to 2010 kind of thing. Within the United Kingdom, when they realized they had a radicalization problem in the country, and they had a problem with it going overseas as well, they decided they would work with non-violent extremists who they thought could form sort of a bulwark against the violent extremists, like a kind of buffer zone or a way of dealing with them or a way of pushing them off. So if you look at Finsbury Park Mosque, which was controlled by Al-Mujahiroon, and they had literally had rocket launchers and AK-47s in there, and they were advocating some really radical stuff. They thought the idea would be to push Al-Mujahiroon out because they were advocating open violence and allow the Muslim Brotherhood to take it over. And now they're kind of looking at it going, yeah, maybe that wasn't the best approach. Maybe we need to deal with violent extremists, deal with non-violent extremists as though they're two sides of the same coin, and don't deal with them in any accommodating way at all. So I think that's kind of a positive thing. There's lessons being learned. We look to the south of us, that's a whole other discussion we won't get into at the moment.
All right, you're welcome to come up to the microphone. We'll be taking questions or comments. It is either a question or a comment, and it is 3 sentences long, including the question. Stephen, you're first.
I attend a group 2, maybe 3 times a year where Muslims and Jews and Christians meet. And we have open discussion and dialogue about many of these issues that face us in Canadian society. That's the comment. So my question is, would you feel that these people represent a silent majority, and in any case, what is the flip side in Canada and America and in other Western nations of Muslim society with organizations to fight to the opposite of what you've been describing for?
Thank you.
In terms of sheer numbers, you talk about a silent majority. They're actually a fearful majority. They're afraid to speak out because they're afraid of the Canadian government, and they're afraid more so of their own community. In terms of absolute numbers, I mean, you see groups like CARICAN say, we speak on behalf of all Canadian Muslims. And it's like, no, you don't. You speak on a good day, on a certain issue, they might speak on behalf of 20% of Canadian Muslims. About 3 weeks from now, I expect to be sitting in a rather similar kind of room, but with a completely different audience, shall we say. And I'm aware of the fact, from having dealt with a variety of Muslim communities, there is no Muslim community any more than there's a Jewish community or a Christian community. There's a multiplicity of communities. But by and large, most of them hate this stuff. They just put their hands over their ears and wish it would go away. Because most of them left over there to come over here to get away from that crap. Excuse my French. Sorry. So yeah, they really don't like this stuff. But the first problem is they're afraid of speaking out within their own community for fear of getting their windows smashed or being barred or shunned or whatever in the community. And they're also afraid of the fact the Canadian government won't pick up and follow them. So there is a chicken and egg kind of thing going on where they want a champion. They're looking for someone to lead them and say, we got to get away from these idiots. We got to get these idiots, put in a corner and, deprogrammed. But at the same time, the Canadian government's going, why won't they speak out? And so somewhere there needs to be someone finally stand up. And I think you're starting to see this with Raheel is starting to do this. She actually wrote a piece last week saying what the Canadian government should do is close all the mosques for 3 months and then review their sermons. And it's like, well, yeah, you can come out of me, that's more radical. But I mean, there's Muslims out there who truly hate this stuff and they truly want to get it put down. But they need the government and they need someone to step forward and be a champion for them. The thing I'm going to be doing in 3 weeks will be a room full of almost entirely Muslims, but 2 federal government people. So I think we're starting to see a bit of a start. They're getting so frustrated they're going to speak out.
Over to your question.
Yes, since you mentioned the UK, I'd like to know how you feel about the Quilliam Foundation, and if that's effect in relation to the if there's an effective de-radicalization program. I heard about Singapore being most effective. I don't know if you're familiar with that and your comment on that.
Yeah. One of the brains behind the Singapore operation is a guy by the name of Hanif Hassan. I used to work with him in Singapore. Truly great guy. Truly laugh. If you ever have endless amounts of money, you want to bring a guy in to talk about de-radicalization, he's wonderful. Can a de-radicalization program work? Yes. I wouldn't say it's the cure-all. We don't have it here in Canada. Guys like Mubin Sheikh and I have spoke out on this and said we need a de-radicalization program of some sort in Canada, and it's got to be government-led, albeit with community support. We ain't there yet. Hopefully we get there. Quilliam Foundation, yes, founded by 2 guys who were amongst the worst of the worst when they were younger. Were heavily into the extremist Islam, El Mujaroon and outfits like that, and at a certain point the brains turned back on and they said, whoa, this is bad stuff, we got to get away from it. It would be nice to see a Quilliam Foundation here in Canada, and I would hope to think that at a certain point we'll see that kind of organization come up out of the grassroots. But yeah, de-radicalization programs run in Singapore, effective because they're contextual and they work within the Singapore context. I'm not sure they work here. The Saudis have one that allegedly works kind of most of the time. I'm not so sure. And a number of European countries are moving in that path. But again, we need government leadership to do that.
Question here or comment?
I read an alert from the Wiesenthal Center today. It was about an event that's being hosted by OISI in our city today. That's inviting influential graduate students to learn more about BDS and all the terrible things that Israel's doing, and to falsify and incite, delegitimize, radicalize, and to recruit. This is an event going on in our city, in a school I used to go to, and I'm very disturbed by it. And I just want to know where the authorities are of this and what can we do about that kind of thing.
Thank you.
The first sort of thought that springs to mind is, as bad as all that stuff looks, and it is bad, I'm not disputing that, you sort of get this impression that the universities are full of waves of these kind of folks. And the reality is it's the 2% here and the 3% there. So it's not as bad as it looks, albeit it's bad. When you ask where are the authorities on this, I don't know. I do know that at the provincial level here in Ontario, there are discussions going on about funding for student unions, things like OPRIG, what you can do with the money, political advocacy groups being funded through universities and all this sort of stuff. Student unions, when they were set up to advocate the student to the board of directors of the university so that the students had a voice in running the university. But now student unions seem to be about advocating Palestinian this and Qatari that and whatever. It's kind of like, whoa, hey, how did that all happen? So I know there's a discussion going on in a couple of different provinces, at the provincial level, because that's a provincial problem, on how to address that. But it's a tough one, and I don't expect to see anything in the near future. What does need to be done, I would argue, and the same thing Rahil sort of says, start shining a light on these people, start calling them out, start challenging them. You want to have a debate here some night, invite one of them up and say, hey, you said this, that, whatever, get up here and explain that to us. We're going to put a flashlight on you and see how you feel. And if you call them out and challenge them, they don't like the spotlight unless they're the ones holding it. So yeah, there's potential to do that. I think it can be done, and I think you're going to start seeing more of that stuff in the future.
Microphone here, Viv.
Okay, it is a question. One of the laughing. One of the major issues that I feel is really important in terms of the media getting involved and being involved in terms of dealing with these kind of situations, with the radicalization. Now we know that there are two things. They are A, pretty lazy, and B, I happen to believe that they themselves have been very much impacted by forms of radicalization, and we saw this with the whole Usma Malik scenario. So what is it that we can do to really impact and change that? Because I believe that that's the way that we are going to get the message out.
Thank you.
The strongest.
I've worked with a number of journalists over the years. Most of the experiences have been positive. No. It is true, there's a certain, I don't know if I call it laziness, but newspapers have increasingly smaller staffs, they're increasingly less experienced, they're increasingly under the gun to get stuff out quick. And yeah, there's a certain, I don't know if I want to use the term laziness, but there's a certain pressure to get stuff done quick. It used to be you'd have a reporter that worked on a fairly narrow subject area and they become expert in it. Now you've got a reporter who's doing a car wreck today, you know, the president's visit tomorrow, and the day after that he's doing the Ottawa shooting or something. And it's not good. There is within Canada and within much of the Western world a sort of political correctness has seized hold of the system. There is a certain lack of will to challenge the narrative. So right now, groups like CareCan, et cetera, have been very good at putting out the narrative. If you raise a question about an honor killing, when somebody goes out and drowns their 3 kids in the canal in Kingston, and you raise a question about honor killing, you're the racist. You're a racist because you asked that question. So that's, one of the problems that has to be turned back around and say, no, we're asking, why do you think it's okay to kill your children under a certain set of context, which we believe does not meet the Charter and it does not meet the Constitution. That is not racism. And on the subject of racism, what race are Muslims? There is no Muslim race, so how can you be racist when you talk about Muslims? Even the arguments don't make sense. I do think they need to be openly challenged. You need to stand up and say public and say, no, questioning honor killing is not racism. When Jamal Badawi, who's a Muslim brother in Seoul who lives here in Canada, puts on his website that wife beating is okay because you follow the checklist and you do it, people should stand up and send that to the federal government and say, no, we think that's against the criminal code, we think that's against the Charter of Rights, and we think that's against the Constitution. That ain't racism, folks, that's culture.
Thank you.
It's the law. The other thing that's going on that I find disturbing, but I see it starting to come home, we have a whole bunch of fuzzy-headed, muddle-brained, academics, journalists, and so-called intelligentsia who say, well, you know, Tom, you have to accept the fact that all cultures are equal. No, I don't. I don't like people that are like cannibal headhunters. I don't want to live in their culture, and I don't think they should come here. I don't think people who advocate female genital mutilation is a good thing. I think there's something wrong with their culture. I believe it's inferior to ours. And I'm willing to stand up and say, sorry, Foreign Affairs, sorry, university, not all cultures are equal. I don't care about your postmodernism. I don't care about cultural relativism. I live here. We have a certain set of values. I kind of like it here. I have lived in other countries where I see it ain't quite so good, and I don't want that crap coming here. So that's something that